Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Robert Stickle. I'm also joined by my colleagues Jim Patterson and Paul Estabrooks. Jim and Paul will be today's presenters and will discuss the topic of how to optimize resources in a constrained economy. I hope that today's presentation grants you some insight into the world of project and portfolio management and gets you excited for the new developments happening within the industry and here at OnePlan. Thank you again, and I'll now turn the presentation over to Jim.
Thanks, Robert. Welcome, everybody. We're pleased to be presenting this timely topic today on how to optimize resources in a constrained economy. So with that, let us get started. Now, doing this with resources is really in response to crisis or changing realities of business. And in response to that, with the business impacts and to minimize those negative impacts on this, organizations need to be good at reacting and responding to the crises that come up to meet those economic changes and realities. And they have to respond quickly in this day and age. And as organizations move from these crises towards recovery, we must develop and execute strategies for restarting the business in a way that takes advantage of any uptick or turns or coming out of those crises. And in each stage of crisis to recovery, we got to evaluate the options and possible corrective actions and what's the right course for the business. And the allocation and the application of resources is a key component of that. Now, the Gartner Group starts talking about when crisis hits, many organizations go immediately into cost reduction mode. And the cost reduction actions that you see up here that are most commonly taken, when we get down to the orange, about the fourth one down, is reduce consulting and contractor spend, freeze hiring. Then below that, there's furlough staff and reduce work hours. And then there's reduce the overall workforce that happens as part of an overall mix of cost reduction. And the question is, if we do this blindly with just the dollar signs as our driver on that, we may be missing opportunities or harming our business if we do that without a more thoughtful approach. So we have to evaluate our staffing levels in uncertain times. And then during these times of uncertainty, we've got to evaluate how workforce reductions will impact the delivery of services so we can maintain business continuity and keep things going, but also achieve some of the business outcomes we have in mind for ourselves in the future. So we need to balance the need for cost reductions with the continued enablement of business outcomes that we're driving towards as an organization, because we have to be moving forward, otherwise we're retreating. Even now, irrespective of the things we've been through with COVID, with international instability right now, with the supply chain disruptions that we've had, and now the great resignation where the job market dynamic has taken on a whole different face. We are now faced with needing more resources in many industries, but qualified personnel are scarce in today's market, and we have to realize that we maybe can't wrap up as quickly as we would like to after we've done staff reductions. So common challenges and errors that happen in this area are failure to align investment and related staffing levels to the business outcomes we desire. So as we're cutting or reducing staff, for example, are we doing it in a thoughtful way that doesn't hamstring or hamper our ability to achieve the business outcomes that we're trying to get to in the future? Because the the crisis that we're facing or the downturn that we're facing is going to end, and we're going to come out of it. So the question is, are we prepared to take advantage of that when we come out of it? So the focus on just short-term budget and cost implications when faced with these things, rather than long-term sustainability, is something that can bite us later on. And so if we cut the services and staff associated with providing the services that contribute to the desired business outcomes, ultimately, we're going to limit the value that our organization can deliver to our customers and take advantage of what remaining business opportunity there is for us. So a reactionary or undisciplined approach to cost and staffing reduction can result in very unintended consequences when economic conditions improved or when we want to recover from that scenario. That cartoon there just really indicates that this stuff can have a domino effect and unintended consequences that we didn't foresee. So considerations in cost and value optimization is that we have to align our future value impacting deliverables by mapping the efforts and staffing requirements to those outcomes, making sure that we're applying the proper amount of resources so that we don't diminish the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And if we right-size enterprise staffing levels to include those allocated within specific business units and make sure that each role is properly placed to drive the organization's strategic priorities, then we can respond to an economic climate and still maintain our course, even if it maybe limits us in a little bit. And having role segmentation so that we prioritize the roles that we need within our organization, make sure we have the right skill sets and the right people, not just cutting numbers. So this really gets down to, if we're doing all that, we want to take advantage of the basics of resource management. And in a resource management 101 definition, it's the efficient and effective deployment and allocation of an organization's resources when and where they're needed. And the benefits of doing good resource management within an organization is provide ongoing resource visibility, so we understand what is required, what the demands are, do we have the capacity to deliver those things overall. Also, we can increase business value by making sure that we are working on the right things and allocating our scarce or valuable resources to the things that make the most return or value to our customers. We can also save time and money, because if we're doing good resource management, we can eliminate things like redundancy and working on similar things in an organization, or having people working on the wrong things, or maybe doing task switching too much to where we're being inefficient in the way that we're working. And if we have visibility in a resource management context, our project success rates will inevitably go up, because we will not make commitments blindly without understanding whether or not we have the wherewithal from a resource perspective to actually deliver on what we're committing to. And that way we're accommodating demand in a thoughtful way, saying that we're working on the right things and making sure that when we make commitments that we think we can actually do it from the outset. And if we don't do these things, we can really burn out employees by overloading people blindly in organizations, and can really affect employee satisfaction and even result in turnover. So resource management challenges as far as executing on this are in a number of areas. One is resource ownership. Many organizations are siloed or in functional areas, or in matrix types of scenarios. And the question is, we're working on projects sometimes, and people are managing work by people and resources that are actually owned or managed by other parts of the organization. So getting that resolved and having common priorities in that resource ownership landscape is important. Resource focus. If we're working on a lot of different things, on a lot of different projects coming at us from a lot of different directions, what are the priorities? What are the things I should be working on? What is how do I know what's the most important things to the organization? And non-project workload. Even before we allocate project work to people in our organization, depending on their role, they may have a heavy non-project or operations role within an organization. People more operations focused might only be 20% available for projects, where people in a more development or project oriented role might be available for 80% of their bandwidth towards projects. And then resource tracking. We sometimes plan and forecast where we want our resources to be working, but that doesn't mean that's where they actually are working. So being able to figure out exactly how we're running and where we're spending our resources and where they're spending their time can have a bearing not only on the current run rate, but also on the assumptions we make in the future on where resources will be spending their time, or how much of their time they're spending on project versus operational work. And then resource visibility, the ability to see at any given point in time what's been committed, how people are actually scheduled in detailed work plans, and then where maybe from a time reporting perspective, where they are actually spending their work. And then resource reporting, being able to provide on a natural basis without doing a lot of manual number crunching, the ability to see all of these resource dimensions in a place where folks that don't work in a resource management system per se can actually get the results and the analysis that they need to make good decisions. And then making sure that it's not too much information. Sometimes we look at grids or matrices because resource management information tends to be very time phased. It can be very granular, can actually be much of an eye chart. And having too much information that's just data and isn't useful information for decision support is something that we can face in an organization if we don't watch out. So resource management steps that we can take in a maturity of an organization in this realm is just resource capacity planning. Start with high level. I have these projects. I need these roles for maybe a half an FTE over 3 months. That level of granularity sometimes is where people can start and maintain and sustain that information initially. Now, resource allocation, which comes next, and organizations may get to that or some may not, is really putting very finite allocations of resources on to specific tasks of work, such that we understand specifically in a schedule, for example, what people are working on and how many hours and units of work they might be doing on a particular task. And then there's resource work management, which then accommodates all those other things, more than just project work. It's what are we doing operationally? What are we doing administratively? What are we doing, personal development wise versus project work, and understanding the full totality of resource management, resource demands. And then team formation is really about team dynamics and getting better as teams. And as we move into more agile approaches and start working as agile teams, we get better and more efficient over time as we get used to working together and get more efficient in that realm. And evolving and improving in that area is a higher level of maturity. And then the personal productivity, where we become our very best and optimize ourselves within either a team formation or our own individual contributions. So these are kind of the stepping stones to resource management maturity. And most people will get started from a resource capacity or more of that top-down, higher level capacity planning, so they at least have a look ahead to give them a sanity check of, do we have the wherewithal to deliver to what we're committing to? And maybe then move on, once they master that, into a more detailed resource allocation if they desire to do so. So the resource management maturity dimensions that we should consider and be honest with ourselves, and as we assess where we're at any given point in time, is maybe just planning out roles and resources. What are the roles and what are the resources that we need to apply, and to what degree, and maybe keep this at a very high level. Now we have to determine what we're ready for as far as planning and tracking granularity. Do we do it at a high level capacity planning level, or do we go down to granular tasks and work items as we look at how we're going to allocate and track resources? Depends on what our needs are and what our readiness is and what we really feel we're ready to sustain. Approval and negotiation. If we're in a matrixed organization, do we have a request process where, say, project managers or project organizations need to say, this is what we need and the type of resource we need, and then a functional or resource organization that possibly says, this is who's available and this is who you can have, and then we both negotiate and agree to that. That's a level of maturity that you may not have at first, but you have to decide whether you need that in your organization eventually. Governance and prioritization, dovetailing this with project intake and making sure that the resources that we're requesting and applying are being applied to the things that we should be working on, the things that the organization wants us to work on, the areas where they want to prioritize investment, and making sure that those things are going on correctly and having that working together. Forecasting versus actual. Do we just want to plan resources in a look ahead and see if we have the resources we need moving forward and then keep adjusting that? Or do we want to track actuals via time reporting and things to understand where we're at and adjust based upon the reality of those actuals? And then resource costing. Do we put dollars or costs on these resources so they can fold into overall financials and financial impact and financial tracking on those resources? That may be something that an organization requires based on the nature of the work they're doing, or the accountability they may have to who their customers are. The idea is we look at these dimensions and we have to assess where we're at, and do we need any of these? And if we do, to what degree do we have to put them into place? Now that top-down capacity planning with the bottom-up, resource allocation from a task level and the feedback that you might get on where people are actually working, the key is to make this all work together and balance it. So I might have assumptions in a top-down capacity plan that says we expect that this is going to happen. These are our assumptions. And then a detailed schedule might come along that flies in the face of that and says, well, this is how we're actually planning on spending these resources' valuable time. And then you might have a timesheet that comes in and says, this is how it's actually happening, and be able to balance those things and make sense out of it and adjust your assumptions in the future and your future plans based upon that reality is something that a mature organization will want to do. Now, the resource management process isn't independent. It intersects with the portfolio management process. If you look at the sequence in the blue boxes down below, it talks about a resource process where you identify generic roles and determine how much of a quantity of each role, identify constraining resources and people that you might have. And then the next one actually intersects with the top in the gray, which is a portfolio management process where ideas and requests come in. You have go, no-go decisions and business cases that are developed. And then a proposed portfolio of projects will come out of that. And at that point, you have to decide and marry the resource demand with the resource capacity to see, do we have the ability to do that? And typically it's that process that ends up going to a governance or steering committee for approving a portfolio and allocating the resources that we want. So these things should work in tandem with one another and in concert to be effective overall. So in understanding resource capacity, what we mean by capacity is how many people do I have that can work on projects? And for how much time are they available for this project work? And what roles can they play if they're multidimensional and what they can do for an organization? The demand is really about, what we need as far as determining the resources required for each project, then prioritizing those projects and allocating resources based on the role and priority until you've exhausted all those resources, not from them being tired, but just until there's no more available. And as we mature, we want to develop projects based on committed availability, such that we want to be able to commit and then feel that we could actually fulfill on that commitment when we allocate these resources to these projects. And that if we really are serious about this, we wouldn't start projects if resources aren't available and not say we can do it and then find out later that, oh my God, we don't have the resources to make it happen. Now, a lot of people are trying to do this in Excel today, and they do it because it's freely available. It's, we all know how to use it to a certain degree. And maybe we're using it because we're unaware of or don't have access to alternatives. But there's limitations. It's a very static manual model. It's very, let's just say, individual and flexible in the way people do it. You can break formulas and calculations, and there's no dynamic visibility of resource capacity versus demand. And it's very time consuming when things change because you have to change things line by line, cell by cell. And it's not really connected to the project execution or say schedules of what we're working on in the portfolio. So it ends up being a separate artifact when you do it in a spreadsheet. And it really doesn't give you necessarily the combined insights for overall reporting and decision support. And it definitely doesn't give you the strategic alignment component. So make sure that these resources are working on the right things from a set of company objectives. And even more so, the move to more agile portfolio and project management does not change the fact that we have to do resource management to be effective in this realm. Even the Gartner Group says that, with agile approaches, you still need to have resource management, but the nature of how we do it may evolve and be scaling. We may be allocating resources in teams rather than by individuals. We might be highlighting our scarce enterprise shared resources that limit our ability to deliver. But the idea is this resource management component still has to be factored in to be successful. And we have to factor in all types of work, they say, whether it's unscheduled work that we're unplanned things that come up, scheduled work that we are, planned and determined, and then the routine, more operational work is we need to consider that as well. So the key is we can't just focus on just projects if we want to be successful because there's other demands that are facing us. And it also needs to be what they call a rolling wave process. So we can't just put a plan in place and say, this is our plan from a resource aspect. You might take a look at what your capacity is, then you might have a plan on what we think and how we're going to use those and on what projects and efforts we're going to use them. But then actual team utilization on a time phase basis, in this case, it's using quarters as a time cadence on this. Based upon actual team utilization, we have to rethink this and say, okay, this is what's really happening. This is how we're really operating. How does this affect, say, our assumptions for the following quarter, for example, and get better and evolve our models and our assumptions and our templates over time? So what we really need is a combined transformative solution that does it all. Something that provides us a modern user interface, something that has a central data repository that has resource management in context with other aspects of managing projects and work. Have embedded processes and flows in there and actionable intelligence that gives us information rather than just a data dump. And also gives us the ability to align with strategies to make sure we're working on the right things. And when we hit constraints, be able to do scenario modeling. And also provide us a facility that we can easily update things as things change. And one plan, as we're going to show you today, has these dimensions available. It connects strategy to execution and includes resource management in that mix. It also has strategic portfolio management so that we can execute on the company's business strategies and also align those strategies with the projects that we're working on. And then with that, aligning the resources that help drive these initiatives that are supposed to help us achieve or realize the strategies that we're trying to achieve. So what Paul's going to show, without me stealing his thunder at all, is resource capacity planning specifically within projects, and then organizational wide across all types of work. And then leveraging strategic portfolio analysis for what if analysis and scenario modeling, leveraging those resources and the resource constraints and prioritizations that we can do. And then financial planning, how the resource planning that we do can funnel into labor costing based upon the rates that we have assigned to our resources. And then just overall dynamic resource reporting and analytics, such that the consumers of this information that need to make decisions for our business can get a good, timely, current picture of what our resource demands versus capacity are. So with that, I'd like to transition this to Paul Estabrooks to show you some of these things in action.
Okay, so today we are going to look at, well, Jim just sort of gave you the rundown, and I'm going to try and walk through a bunch of those components over the next few minutes. So I'm actually going to start sort of very early on in the story. So I'm in the strategy section of One Plan intentionally because everything links back to that objective and key results, the things we're trying to do and why, which helps sort of define which projects we should fund and which projects we should assign resources to. When we're in a constrained scenario, we want to make sure that what resources we do have are being used effectively. So I want to sort of just quickly go through this. So in here in my strategy, I have a set of objectives, and underneath those objectives, I have a set of KPIs, or sorry, key results. Sorry, wrong term. And so those key results, achieving a key result means you're going to meet the objective. That's the whole purpose of this. And so underneath this is the ability then to link this to our projects and our initiatives to say, how does this project help us get where we're going and how much it helps? And then when we do some prioritization in a few minutes, we'll be able to see, are we prioritizing against the objectives and things that we have? So just wanted to sort of set that up because it's going to become very helpful here in just a minute. So I'm going to jump into the portfolio, drill into this view. So in here, you can see we have portfolios, programs, and then projects. I'm going to jump down to one we've got down here. This is a proposed project, okay? And so I want to explore a few things in here in this proposed project. I'm going to start with just that alignment. I want to sort of bring that sort of full circle. So this SAP upgrade is aligned to a specific objective. And if I click into this enterprise architecture section, I've aligned it to 2 of the key results. So those are 2 of the 4 key results underneath that corporate objective. And it has a 25-75 split. So the budget sort of is impacting 25% of the budget's attributed to accomplishing one of the key results and the other 75% to the other. And I could associate it to applications, SAP, for example, products, other things that we may have in the organization. But I wanted to focus quickly on that connection to strategy. So this SAP upgrade project, which is in the create stage, we're planning it out, is focused first on these two results and that particular corporate objective. So we've linked our strategy to the project itself. Now let's look at a couple of things we want to do. So we want to start planning out how this project might look from a resourcing perspective. And so I've added a few generic resources in here, developer, PM, business analyst, and support, and started to assign the kinds of work I think we'll need, or the kinds of effort, let's say, that we will need. I'm not looking at this in the context of a specific schedule. At this point, one may not exist. Typically, when planning out resourcing at this level in a proposed stage, we're sketching out sort of what the anticipated demand or commitments would be. And so we're in this commitment view, and we're making that initial assessment, where we want to put that time and effort, and what roles would we need. Now, we've got a PM in here, so we've started looking at sort of how an individual might get involved. But first and foremost, we're going to look at this from a generic role perspective, and then later I can swap those in and out. in here, just so you can see, we have other views, we have a schedule view. So later, once we execute on this project and we start to actually take these resources and assign them to specific tasks, we can consolidate that data and look at that in a similar tabular format. If you think back to Jim's slides a few minutes ago with the Excel documents, we're giving you that same look and feel, just richer data, more active data, more ability to work with that data. And then later, if we're going to do timesheeting or any other kind of updating, we can bring that in as well. So we can then compare and see what was the original commitment, how did we schedule the resource, did the scheduling align with the commitment in terms of timing and quantity, and then in the actuals, the timesheets, what actually got done and how is that transitioning as we go through it. So we have all three of those views here. Today, I really want to focus on that upfront piece. So my commitments are, I've sort of laid out what I think I need, probably need a PM for the rest of the, in some capacity throughout the project, so we'll just sort of fill in that gap. Okay, that's pretty good for where we want to go. Now, just quickly, while I'm here, I could come in and say, I want to bring in the costs from that resource planner. So I'm going to ask it to go and import them, and there they are. We've brought that in. So now we know what the costs would be for those different roles to be on this project, and we're starting to build out the budget for this. So I look at my resourcing commitments. Maybe I collaborate with some colleagues and say, hey, to the development manager, what do you think you need in terms of the scope of this project and how you might, what level of development effort, and what's the PM effort going to be? Do we need a business analyst full-time, part-time? Is it front-end loaded and so forth? And we sketch all that out, and then we can draw that data in using rates and roles for the roles in the system to help build up our budget for this particular proposed project. So I've captured that data, and then now I want to look at this from a prioritization perspective. So I'm going to jump back to the portfolio. But before I do that, I want to highlight one thing. I picked on this particular project, and it is notionally linked to Project Professional. But I could have done this for a project here that's linked to, in this case, Planner and DevOps, or a different one here that's simply in DevOps, but it's an Epic. So if I just click on that really, really quickly, I'll see that the resource plan is the same construct. We got some resourcing stuff already put into this particular one. We could build that out more if that were the case. So independent of how we're going to execute the project, whether it's an agile project or a waterfall project, whether it's being managed with a very robust tool like Project Professional or a lighter weight tool like Planner or Project for the Web, we have a common view of our resourcing requirements and our common view of our resourcing effort. Okay, likewise with the budgets as well. So now I will go to do that prioritization. So if I bring up the prioritization, I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm actually going to look at this first by budget. And the purpose of that is I want to sort of grab a target and say, what is my target? Where am I? I've got I'm over my sort of cash flow model we've created or cost flow model. And I can start to look at projects that need to come in or come out of the model. And I'm obviously going to be biased towards the one I just did, which is this SAP upgrade. So maybe if I just wipe out for now, for analysis purposes, some of the ones on hold, and you'll see we're going to get a lot closer on the budget. We've still got ways to go. I'm not going to try and solve that here. But then I can start to look at this. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit around timing. And this starts to get into impacting resources. What if I said that project could start later and move it out? You'll see it recalculate its impact to budget. That's going to have a corresponding impact to resourcing. And we'll jump to that in just a second. But we're looking here to do prioritization. I could bring into this equation, I take this away. I could maybe come in here and say, I want to add a column in here that looks at what key results these projects are aligned to, or filter on a specific objective and make sure that we got the right projects in place. So again, I can bring strategy into this exercise to make sure that if we're going to deploy those scarce resources, then let's make sure we're putting them on the things that matter most. Now that I've done the financial side of this, I can start to look at this from a resourcing perspective, and now I'm surfacing all that data. Remember, we were able to capture a resource plan for each project, regardless of how we ultimately intend to execute that project. So we have that common language, and now you can see the impact of that. And as we start to move some projects in and out of this, you'll see the corresponding impact to the resource pool. That made a big difference. Now I've freed up some resources. I've got some additional capacity. Again, I can start to move stuff around within the portfolio where we are in this whole exercise to make sure that we have the right resources on the right projects and that we're taking maximum advantage of where we have pockets of availability. So having done all that, let's say out of this exercise and we save the scenario and we move forward, and now that SAP upgrade project is going to be flipped to an active project. I won't do that right here, but this is, you could do that. Change that to an active project. Now we need to start staffing this exercise. So I'm going to kind of bring this sort of full circle. I'm going to jump into my resource plan. Think of this as a view in the lens of a resource manager. Okay, we've agreed to sort of fund some additional projects. We've agreed to move forward. And if I scroll down, I'm going to find the SAP upgrade. I've got some projects in here. Wait, I'm going to jump to a different view here really quickly just because I want a specific one. Go down to that. Apologies, wrong one. There you go. There are those 4 generic roles that I had put into the resource pool and their requirements. I'm looking at a resource requirements view. I've got a multitude of views here that I could look at in each project and make some decisions. What I want to do is I'm going to grab that particular project, developer. Now, here's the thing that everyone grapples with. Remember, we have a constrained resource pool. Let's look at best match. So very quickly, it's going to highlight for me who my developers are. You can see their percentage availability from really available to not so available. And I've got what department they're in, role, and so forth. I want to fulfill on that developer role. I need 218 and a half hours in March and a bunch more in April. So what I want to do, maybe Woo is a good fit. So I'm going to say replace. I have an option. I can replace that and just Woo becomes the developer on the project and those hours become counted against his availability and on we go, okay? Or I can fulfill. And I wanted to highlight this because I think it's a very compelling exercise to say, it's unlikely in a lot of cases, especially in a constrained resource environment, that one individual may be able to fulfill that role. There may be scenarios where you need to split roles between resources to take advantage of pockets of availability, partial availability along the way. And so Woo, look, only has 184 hours anyway. This role was going to need to be split because 218 was more than a full month. But let me just say that I'm going to switch that to, let's say 120 because I need Woo on some other stuff. And I'm going to switch this to 24, let's say. And what you're seeing up top is that there's still 98 and a half hours to fulfill and another 21 and a half. So the developer still has demand as required, demand, and we haven't fulfilled it all, but we have put some of it on. Then I could go and maybe Steve becomes the next resource and on we go. Unlikely we'll use the bottom two because they're already over allocated. I probably have to solve that problem too. So when you do that, you can start to partially split these up, or if you have an opportunity, like in the case of a PM, you probably want one, is who's your best fit, and that might highlight where else they may need to move off of a project or adjust something somewhere else as we kind of move this forward. So I wanted to show that because I think a lot of organizations these days grapple with this challenge. We get asked about it a lot, and this ability to partially fulfill roles and split work across resources and have the visibility into doing that is very compelling, and it helps address the problem that a lot of organizations, or rather the challenge a lot of organizations are seeing. I'll conclude here. I'll jump back to my portfolio, jump over to the dashboards, and we'll have a quick look. I have these different resources or different views in here where I can now see how different roles are going here. I'm going to pick a different role. Let's go look at that developer role. You can see sort of we know Jack's over allocated. We have a horrible over allocation issue coming up in a few months. We might want to start to look at that, potentially higher. We're going to have to move some projects around. So we have this rich database, all the data that's available to us being exposed here in Power BI. You can build lots of reports. I'm just showing you a good example to start with to help better understand where are your resources being deployed, what are the big projects that are looking for them, where's the demand exceeding capacity in the aggregate or by role and so forth. So lots of powerful data here to do analytics and drill into and learn more about the resource pool and help plan ahead as you deal with these constraints. And with that, Jim, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, terrific, thanks. So let's summarize and talk about some potential next steps you can take. So in summary, from a topical perspective, organizations must respond to crisis and changing business conditions. Actions should involve more than just a cost-cutting lens on the problem. And we need to balance cost reduction with continued business outcomes and innovation to make sure that we keep moving on as a going concern. And that reactionary and undisciplined approaches can bring unintended consequences and bring difficulties for recovery when the times get better. Now, resource management is a critical success factor for overall project and portfolio management success. And that high-level capacity planning is a good place to start if you're not already kind of using this or practicing these disciplines. Now, more detailed resource allocation can follow as you're ready or needed, or some folks stay at that higher capacity planning level and it meets their needs just fine. Now, we also need to align and prioritize portfolio deliverables, as Paul was showing you, and then map our effort and staffing levels to that and to the business outcomes that are aligned to those strategies that Paul showed you in the solution itself. Now, our approaches and processes we use for ourselves should align with our organizational readiness and maturity, both our culture and our abilities. And that hopefully you saw today that One Plan provides a great platform for all PPM capabilities in the Microsoft Cloud. And that One Plan provides scenario modeling and analysis, so you can do what-ifing and responding to those changes. It also extends your existing solutions, like Paul talked about, to provide enhanced visual planning and capabilities if you're using other tools like Project and Planner, et cetera, Azure DevOps. It also enhances all aspects of top-down strategic planning and analysis, rich set of capabilities, and it's fully integrated and embedded in the Microsoft Cloud and can be consumed in a fused user experience. Paul showed it to you in a browser, but it can be shown and used right within Teams or in Azure DevOps itself or within Power Apps. And that it's connected to Microsoft Teams as a hub for all aspects of planning and collaboration around this, not just the resource management components. So for next steps, we would suggest that you take baby steps, not get too ambitious. Assess your own readiness, assess your resource management maturity, understand the environment and culture that you're working in, and then build a resource management roadmap to put together a practical action plan to get to the next maturity level from a resource management perspective that you want to get to. And we would highly encourage you to define your process first that works within your organization, and then we can talk about automating it in a solution, because we want to automate something that's working. We don't want to automate vapor or something that's not working or something that's dysfunctional. So the idea there is to think about these steps as the next practical steps that you can take in moving towards these disciplines. Now, we have a passion for this stuff. One Plan Solutions is consistently recognized as a leader in the project and portfolio management realm, including the resource management pieces that you saw here today. We have many gold certifications from Microsoft, and we've actually been named multiple times as their Project and Portfolio Management Global Partner of the Year, as we were last year. We're also recognized for our expertise and our capabilities within analysts like Gartner and Infotech Research Group. And we're certified by Scaled Agile Inc. So we have a lot of capability and competencies for people that are taking that agile road and have portfolio management discipline needs in that realm. But we can help you not just with the technology, but on the people and process side things as well. Anything to make you successful as you transform your organization to becoming more successful and more optimized. Now, we do these webinars all the time. We have a couple of announcements coming up that aren't ready quite yet, but next week we're doing one with our strategic partner Exco Partners out of Australia on the Power to Choose Adaptive Project and Portfolio Management with One Plan. It'll be March 24th Australia time at noon. Here in the Pacific Coast time, that would be March 23rd, since they're a day ahead of us at 5 p.m. Pacific time. If you do register for that and you're interested for that topic, you will get a link to the recording as well as a copy of the slides, so you don't necessarily have to be time zone friendly if you want to participate in this topic. You can also trial One Plan out on Microsoft's App Stores. We have different One Plan trial variations out there. For doing a lot of the things you saw here today, you would want to use the adaptive portfolio management template that we have out there, but we have ones that are focused strictly on strategic portfolio management, agile portfolio management, even professional services automation. So, and there's even one out there that just focuses on resource management itself. So feel free to explore out there and get access to a free trial. And if you like, we can actually chaperone you through that trial as well if you like. Also, we do offer free roadmap workshops. If you're curious about what it would take to get from where you're at to using solutions like this, we're happy to give you a free roadmap workshop session to review your current use of solution and tools, assess your desired future state, and determine how you could implement that in your organization and what a roadmap might look like for that. And to be quite frank, you may already own a number of the tools that are required to do something like this. You may already own some of the things and not even know it. So the free trial is available, the roadmap workshop, and if you're not quite there yet, and you just saw a generalized demo from Paul today and want something a little more personalized to your use cases and scenarios, we're happy to schedule a one-on-one demo with you and tailor it to those topics. Just reach out to us at contact@oneplan.ai. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate your attendance. We really would like to engage with you. We are invested in success, and by that we mean our customers' success. You can reach out to us on the general contact us line, or Paul or I individually. You'll get a copy of these slides and you'll have our information if you care to reach out and start furthering the discussion. So our goal is to really provide one interface, one experience via one plan. And let's see how that can help you and your organization moving forward. Thank you again. Have a great day.